Well, I'm super glad you're here. We met through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program.
Yep.
Say that 10 times fast.
And I don't know if I want to say it once.
You're running a really, really spectacular program on the West Bank that I think a lot of folks are familiar with. Your counterpart or your sort of ally here on the East Bank. But could you tell us a little bit about Cafe Hope and also who you are? Who the heck are you? Because you're an interesting person. You have a fascinating story. I know that during one of those Goldman Sachs days when we were kind of chatting in the hall, you gave me the spiel about how you got into doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So I'd love to really touch on all that because you have such a valuable core set of beliefs that come from such a diverse set of experiences.
Yeah, it's so Cafe Hope was started in 2010. A really good friend of mine, Tim Falcon, was one of the founders of Cafe Reconcile. He's a West Banker. He came one day and said, the kids from the West Bank can't get over to Cafe Reconcile. Let's do something like this on the West Bank. And so Cafe Hope was birthed, and we were originally an affiliate ministry of Catholic Charities. So, we'll always be thankful to those guys because without Catholic Charities, Cafe Hope would have never had a start. We didn't have any money.
They were sort of your seed funders in a sense.
Yeah, they truly were. We were in one of their buildings. We were in the Madonna Manor building for the first 5 years of our existence. And I picked up some incredible role models. Gordon Wadge was the president and CEO, and to this day, he's still a role model. And so he's a man that's done some fantastic work for everybody in the city, Hispanics, kids, infants. So he's just a man that gives his heart to everything he does, and I learned a lot from him. But Cafe Hope was birthed, so I was actually the first chairman of the board of Cafe Hope.
And who are you?
Oh, sorry. I am Louis Arocha, and I am currently the executive director at Cafe Hope.
But you weren't always the executive director.
No, I started out as a board member. Tim, again, a good friend. It's really funny how I got started with nonprofits. So before Reconcile was Reconcile, it was a program called Kids Cafe.
Kids Cafe.
Yeah, where they would go and bring young people in from the projects and try to give them a fine dining experience. So Tim called and he said, hey, we need some families to be hosts to the kids that are coming in to Kids Cafe. Would you and your family be interested? I had 3 kids, and I said, that'd be a great experience for my kids to see the other side of life, right? I think my kids lived a pretty good life, probably a privileged life. Mm-hmm. And so we went to dinner. My oldest son went into the kitchen. My wife and I sat down with the 2 younger kids, and we hosted 3 brothers, 8, 6, and 4. And so we chatted for a while, and then food came out, and we were supposed to pray. And so we said grace and prayed a little bit, and we had meatballs and spaghetti that night. Mm-hmm. And what happened next is what changed my life and my wife's life forever. They put food on the table, and these 3 young men started eating with their hands, even though there was silverware laid out in front of them. Mm-hmm. And, Tim apparently saw my face and my wife's face and ran over and said, I didn't do a good job of telling you guys what was going to happen here. And so we made adjustments, showed them how to hold a knife and fork, how to use a knife and fork. But on the way home, we decided as a family that we needed to be more involved, to think.
As a family?
As a family, sure, because I think that was a good lesson for our kids. To think in the city of New Orleans, in the United States of America, that we still had young people that have never had the opportunity to use a fork and knife and had to eat with their hands. It was eye-opening. My family was in no means wealthy, but I'd never seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so we walked away feeling like we were lucky and privileged, and that we had to find a way to give back and to be involved to change things. And so that night changed everything for us. So Tim called and asked me to be a board of director. It took me about 30 seconds to say yes. At the first meeting, I was voted the chairman of the board. And then some things happened. We made a change at the executive director's level. And in my infinite wisdom, I said, I work for my dad's business. I work for a family business. I can go over there and just watch things for a couple of weeks until we find an executive director.
It'll be your side hustle.
Yeah, well, not even a side hustle. I was doing it just because I was trying to be a good chairman of the board.
To stay engaged.
Yeah. And 2 weeks turned into a month, and a month turned into a month and a half, and friends and family started going, something's different about you. What's going on? And I think I found some inner peace, and I found some joy in being there and being a part of those kids' lives and trying to change their lives on a daily basis. And so eventually they said, why don't you take the executive director's job? And I said, because I know what you pay. but went home and talked to my wife and my family, and everybody agreed to make the sacrifices that went along with taking that position. And so it's really been a family affair. I'm so grateful to my wife and my kids for the sacrifices that they've had to make so that I could find peace. And so it's been a journey. It's been good.
What was that transition? How would you qualify you before that family experience at the Kids Cafe?
Yeah, I think just caught up in the rat race, all about how much money I can make and give my kids everything I possibly can. Just worked myself to death. And I think the difference between the two jobs was I enjoyed what I did. I enjoyed being around my dad every day.
Yeah.
Right. I enjoyed making money, obviously. But after a few years, the satisfaction went away. We were in financial service business. He brought me in. I opened a mortgage division for him.
Okay.
And so I found a lot more satisfaction in helping a kid on a daily basis than helping somebody get into a house. And that's in its simplest and rawest form.
Did you know that about yourself before that experience with the dinner? Was it wild to you that you could have gone so much of your professional and adult life and not known that something really meant that much to you?
Yeah, it was quite frankly embarrassing a little bit, not to pay attention enough to your city and your surroundings to know what was really going on. I was embarrassed by it. I needed to change and make some changes. So again, thankfully, just surrounded by good friends and a great family and an unbelievable wife, and I was able to take that journey.
So what's it been now? You say that you're settled, or there's a different kind of personal journey that you're on.
Yeah, listen, I think there were a few things, right? I think looking back, I got where I'm at because of my mom and dad. Again, in no way were we wealthy. No way did I live a privileged life, but I had the support of my mom and dad. My dad at one point worked 3 jobs to put me through high school.
Wow.
I went to a Catholic high school, and he worked 3 jobs to make sure.
In New Orleans? Or?
Yeah, on the West Bank. I went to Archbishop Shaw. And so my dad took on 3 jobs so that I could go to Shaw High School.
Yeah.
I owe so much to them because even though he worked 3 jobs, he found a way to be a part of my life.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that I saw when I was a part of Cafe Hope and Kids Cafe. I can't imagine what life would have been like without the support of my mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And looking back now, we always had kids at our house, right? I mean, I played athletics my whole life. My dad found time to be out there and coach sometimes, but it always seemed like my house was the house where everybody wanted to be. And looking back, I know now it's because the people that would add just didn't have that support. When they came to my house, they were treated and loved just like my brothers and sisters and I were.
It was magnetic.
It was. And so I think this is where it came from, and it took a lot of years to get here and figure those things out. But here we are.
Is that what you're building now through the nonprofit?
I hope so.
That same idea of
a
home for everyone?
I hope so, because a lot of the kids that come into our program, I think that's the main thing that they're missing, right? They don't have that family support. They don't have anybody to teach them right from wrong. Society is messed up right now, right? We have kids who are growing up with nobody and with nothing, and we're not even supporting them as a society. You have kids that have dropped out of school in 6th and 7th grade. How does that happen? How do we allow that to happen? Or they've gotten kicked out because they're a behavior problem, and then there's no clear path back to society. And this is where we are. And it scares me. This is what scares me. I try to treat every kid who comes into the Cafe Hope building like they're my own. And so that's good and bad, right? Mm-hmm. It's good because I care about them and I love every one of them. But it's bad because I treat them like I treat my kids, and I'm brutally honest. I try to be really open and honest with my kids, and I think I bring that to the table with Cafe Hope. So sometimes tell them things they don't want to hear about themselves.
Yes.
But that's me, and if I don't do that, then I feel like I didn't do my job.
There's a phrase, right? They call it the bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah.
Or the soft racism or soft bigotry of low expectations.
There are 6 million of these kids in the country today, right? There are 6 million opportunity youth in the country, and the vast majority of them are minority black men that haven't had anybody in their lives to show them the right way. The school systems failed them. The law enforcement systems failed them. Mm-hmm. And listen, it's not just those systems. Sometimes they've failed themselves too. They have allowed the system to cheat them. And so that's where we're at, right? We're trying to get them back on that path to self-sufficiency where they can take care of themselves. It scares me to death that one of my kids, this country isn't in great shape financially. So at the drop of a dime, they could cut off food stamp programs. They could cut off Section 8. And I don't want one of the kids that came through Cafe Hope's program to end up under a bridge.
To be injured because the position is so vulnerable already.
Yeah, you just don't know. You know, they have to have these skills to communicate with the real world, and they have to have these skills so that they can go out and take care of themselves, to make money for themselves. If we don't do it, there's opportunities, but it's the wrong opportunities. The drug dealers are going to get a hold of them, and that's, you know, that ends in two places, right? Jail or death. And that's not what I want for any kid. I think every kid deserves an opportunity to have a good life.
Can you unpack a little bit? And I know we were chatting about it before. We're definitely familiar in the Gigsy ecosystem with this pretty new term of what we call opportunity youth. Yeah. This idea of young folks who, as you say, kind of have been forgotten, excluded, pushed out through these particular systems, be it education or criminal justice. Sure. Can you unpack what this term is and what it means for your organization?
Yeah, so the definition of opportunity youth is 17 to 24. Some people will go 16 to 24. We prefer to stay 17 just because we train in the restaurant and hospitality industry, and I think that is no place for a 16-year-old. We've had a couple of 16-year-olds come in. We had a 16-year-old girl, and it changed the program, right? She cried every day for 16 weeks. And I went, we can't do that to a young person.
Sure.
This is a tough business. There's a lot of pressure. Even when it's just inside the program, there's a lot of pressure. And so we try to lean towards 17s. We've done some 16s that are really, really mature after an interview. And we'll go as high as 27, 28, depending on what our class makeup looks like. But 17 to 24, not in school, not employed, or both.
So these are prime working age, really.
Yeah.
You should be beginning your career. You should be practicing skills. These are young folks who,
they should be
if they're not in school,
yeah,
they should be doing something.
Absolutely. And so they don't have the skills. Again, once they get separated from the education system, if they don't have that family support, and 90% of them don't, then they just drift. And they end up on the streets. And they end up in the hands of the drug dealers.
So what does your program look like? So I think a lot of folks have heard of the type of programming, the idea where you're getting some kind of soft skills or hard skills training, and then it's prepping you to get sort of entry level into work. But what makes the Cafe Hope ecosystem so particularly special?
So 16 weeks. I think it costs them absolutely nothing to come into the program. So it's a 16-week program. It costs them nothing. We provide uniforms. We provide 2 meals a day.
Oh, wow.
So the first 4 weeks, they don't go into the kitchen. They don't step foot in the dining room unless it's eating family meal. We have family meal every day with staff and every student.
Just like a restaurant.
After the restaurant closes for the day at 2, everybody comes down and we sit together and break bread and chat about life. But so it's 16 weeks. The first 4 weeks are upstairs in a classroom. They're working on self, trying to figure out where they are, why they're there, where they want to go. We're teaching skills, communication skills, goal setting. We have a great partnership with Gulf Coast Bank, comes in and talks about financial literacy. LSU Ag Center will come in from time to time and talk about where food comes from. And every time I say that, I laugh a little bit because in our old location, we had a 1.2-acre garden. And
wow.
we sent a class of kids, 8 kids out to the garden, said, well, chef needs some radishes. Can y'all go get some radishes? And they came back about 45 minutes later and said, there's no radishes in the garden. And I'm like, there's 5 rows of radishes. What do you mean there's no radishes? They were looking for a radish tree. They were looking for a tree to pick radishes. And so light bulbs, again, right? It's always a learning process.
Yeah.
We need to start teaching these kids, if they're going to be involved in the restaurant industry, where food comes from. And so the garden became a bigger part of the model. And so, you run across those stories sometimes that we all assume everybody knows where food comes from. Like we started saying, where do grapes come from? Winn-Dixie. They just
and why should somebody think anything other than that if they haven't
exactly.
if they haven't ever had that experience?
Exactly. And so the program is always changing, right? I mean, we have a curriculum, but it's nothing set in stone. We always want to be better than what we are. We'll never stop trying to improve the program. And so it's just little lessons like that we have to learn, that we make adjustments for. That's a long way around. But we go 4 weeks where they just focused on self. They just need to figure out who they are, where they need to be. We try to give them those soft skills that they need to communicate in the workplace, to survive in the workplace. They'll come downstairs. They do 6 weeks in our kitchen. Our kitchen staff's made up of 3 phenomenal chefs, over 50 years experience.
Wow.
They're only in there 6 weeks, so we're not turning any kid into a chef, right? We're trying to give them the basic skills to get their foot in the door. And then they'll spend 6 weeks on the floor of the restaurant training with 2 staff members with about 12 to 15 years worth of experience on the front of house. And that's a part of the program that's really overlooked. You know, it's like, oh yeah, they're going to go wait on tables. But for a lot of these kids, that's where they learn communications. When they first come into the building, there's never any eye contact. It's shake a hand with the head down and not look at you. It's not until they get on the floor of that restaurant where they learn how to communicate the proper way, to look somebody in the eye, to shake somebody's hand, to have a nice grip when you shake somebody's hand. So the floor of the restaurant is really important for us because that's where they grow as a person. They learn a lot in the kitchen, right? They learn to be organized. They learn to watch time, how to put a recipe together. But on the floor of the restaurant, that's where they learn to be a human being. And I was just telling your partner before we walked in, people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I could care less whether they go into the restaurant business when they graduate from Cafe Hope. The restaurant business was picked because there were a lot of opportunities, obviously, in New Orleans, but it also teaches a lot of other skills that are applicable to any job they want to take. If you can communicate, if you can stay organized, if you can learn to follow directions, you can go do anything in life. And the restaurant business allows them to learn those skills.
Man, you come alive when you talk about designing the curriculum and what the experience is and just what sharing that experience is like.
That's the rock of the whole thing, right? Cafe Hope is really odd, and so are the other programs, you know, Reconcile and Liberty's Kitchen. We're social entrepreneurship, and we walk that fine line every day. Because people that come eat at Cafe Hope, they don't want to hear that we got kids working in the kitchen. They don't want to hear that it's kids that have never done it before waiting their tables. It's New Orleans. They expect good food and they expect good service. And so we walk that fine line between programming and being a real restaurant. And it's a balance. It's a really delicate balance.
How do you navigate that? Because on one hand, you want to instill the learning environment and the mission aspect of the organization. But on the other hand, like you say, it's a restaurant. It has to be top notch, and you can't water down the experience for somebody who's walking in the door.
I think that's where your customers come into play, right? It's really important that we attract people who understand where these kids have been. It's really important that we attract customers who aren't going to judge them because they've never walked in these kids' shoes before. And we get those people. And the ones who don't get it, when they walk in, they don't come back. I mean, I think we have great food and I think we have great kids, but there are some people that it's just not for them. Yeah. I mean, if you want to come in and eat in 7.5 minutes, then Cafe Hope's not the place for you. And I think that's just part of the charm of programs like Cafe Hope.
I'm sure that there's a lot of conversation around how do you continue to find and increase outcomes for young folks. But the counterpoint I'm wondering too is where do more people like you come from? Folks who see something in themselves and all of a sudden it wakes them up in this kind of way.
I think for a lot of people, I think it's two things. I think some people are born into families who raise their kids that way and show them. We have an obligation. I don't want to get off on a religious tangent, but I believe God calls on each of us to be good stewards of his people. And I think there are families who raise their kids that way. And then I think there are experiences like I had that change people. So I think it's one of those two things. And there are good people out there. There are a lot of good people. You know, we talk about the restaurant business. It was picked because there were a lot of jobs, sure. But it's also picked because there are a lot of good people involved in the restaurant business. There are a lot of incredible chefs who are so giving of themselves and their time and their fortune. Emeril Lagasse. I don't know where Cafe Hope would be without Emeril Lagasse and his foundation. John Besh. John Besh got us through the first 5 years of our program by coming and bringing every one of his restaurants in to do a fundraiser in the month of December.
You're kidding me.
No. Those two guys are phenomenal. I don't know where we'd be. God, the restaurants are, Coquette. Jason Goodenough from Carrollton Market. We got 2 kids working inside his restaurant right now. Commander's Palace. Trenas. Those guys are just phenomenal. There were some really, really good people in the restaurant business.
What is the culture of the restaurant business? Because it is so distinct. It's so different from everything else. I think when Anthony Bourdain started putting out his Kitchen Confidential books was when folks started to see it on the mainstream. And now it's almost become something new and different when the wave of like the Nina Comptons that we're getting, the Elon Shayas that we're getting.
Sure.
It's become something so fascinating.
It is, and it's changed that business, right? I mean, listen, we have a young man that came to us, and he could barely speak when he walked in the doors, and he committed to just doing life skills. Mm-hmm. We got him through the life skills program, and then he said, "Well, I could be in a kitchen because there's not too many people in the kitchen. Let me try it."
He's intimidated.
Yeah, and so he got in the kitchen and did okay. And we thought that was going to be it, right? And he comes one day to my office and he goes, you mind if I try to work on the floor of the restaurant? I was like, oh man, that'd be awesome, So he makes it through the whole program. It's life-changing for this young man. He's never going to work at any of the finest restaurants in the city of New Orleans. He just doesn't have those skills. So he says, I want to work in the restaurant business. So we brought him to Applebee's, right? Applebee's. And this is where it gets crazy. They tried him like just serving in the restaurant. It didn't work out. They tried letting him do the curbside service where people pull up. It didn't work out. Mm-hmm. They put him in the dish room. He's a rock star. He's been there 6.5 years. He's making $14 an hour before overtime. And the manager says anytime they need somebody, he's the first person they call. He comes in and he's embarrassed to share his story with the other kids because he's embarrassed by how much money he makes. When he's making overtime, he's making $21 an hour washing dishes. And he's a stud. And so that's the impact that the restaurant business can have on kids. And getting back to your point, that's where it's changing, right? I mean, in the past, a dishwasher made $5 or $6 an hour, minimum wage at best. And that's changing now because of those people. They're starting to understand that they have a responsibility to take care of the people that work for them. Mm-hmm. And wages have increased dramatically in the restaurant business. So I feel good about putting kids at most restaurants. It's one of the things that we take really seriously is our restaurant partners. There are some places where, unfortunately, I wouldn't put a kid because of culture. Because
it's just not right.
Yeah, because of the way they treat. Our kids are really delicate, right? I mean, when they leave Cafe Hope, for a lot of them, when they come to Cafe Hope, they have achieved no success in their life. They haven't finished anything. So they finish our program, they have success. I want them to have success the next step out the door. I don't want them to walk into failure. So we take that really seriously, and we meet once a week as a staff, and we talk about every student, and we talk about fits and where they can work. And again, sometimes it's not in the restaurant business. Sometimes it's in a grocery store. We want them above everything else to succeed. Yeah, and success. We want them to continue to feel good about themselves.
How do you find that fine line? Because it's such a pickle to be in. Yeah. And I personally experienced it when I got into the city through education, where there's always this balance of being in this kind of helping or this service, educational, nonprofit role. You are constantly on that precipice between your hopes and aspirations for those that you work with, while also confronting the hard reality of things, just the absolute hard reality. And for folks that can't manage it, they get overwhelmed because they feel like they're constantly failures, or they feel like they're doing a disservice. For folks that get too caught in the weeds of like the hard reality. For folks on the other side who get a little too airy, too in the sky, you get the opposite issue, which is sort of caught in the wind saviorism of look at how great this thing is. It seems like you have this very sharp understanding of the practicality and the aspirational, like the calling aspect, like your spiritual aspect of it.
Yeah.
How do you find that edge?
I think it's just by taking an interest in every kid and wanting to see the best for every kid that comes through the door. And that's tough. Like you said, in the nonprofit world, there are a lot of nonprofits competing for a little pool of money. And so, you push for successes because you fear if you don't have those successes, you may not get funded. But it has to be a balance, and you always have to have the kids first. And if the kids aren't first, then the mission goes away. Mm-hmm. If we don't put our kids first and we don't make them the number one concern, then we're just a restaurant. We're not a program anymore. And the other part of it is being lucky enough to hire a great staff.
Yeah.
Right. No money, no mission. Right. And so that's my worry. It's nobody else's worry inside the Cafe Hope organization except me. I got to make sure we have enough money to keep the doors open. And so sometimes I got to be brought in check. I'm pushing for, hey, we got to get more kids in. We got to get more kids in. And sometimes not having, again, I go back to the spiritual part of it. God works in mysterious ways. It seems like every time I complain about we need 2 or 3 more kids for this class, it's best that it was only 3 or 4 kids because those kids really needed a lot of attention. Yeah. And so it just always seems to work out that way. I think the Holy Spirit brings us everything that we need, puts us where we need to be, brings us the right kids.
To you, it's as much an act of faith as it is the business side of things.
Absolutely. I think your staff has to be treated the right way too, right? And you got to be really careful of burnout. I got to really do a good job of keeping an eye on my staff members, making sure they're not burning out, because you get caught up in these kids' lives, and burnout's real. You start dealing with their problems, and they're complex, and it can take it out of you in a hurry. There's been many graduation ceremonies where half the staff's in tears sitting there because it's over, and these kids are leaving, and they've just become a part of your life for 16 weeks. So you got to be careful. You got to treat them right. And I think the one thing that I always lean on with my staff is that I'll never ask them to do something that I wouldn't do, and I'll never ask them to put their family before Cafe Hope, because I'll never put my family before Cafe Hope. Now, for me, it's a little different because I look at every kid as being a part of my family once they're in the door. But there is a fine balance, and you got to have a team behind you because one person can't do it. It's impossible.
How do you look at that broader nonprofit ecosystem in the city? Because I think a lot of folks don't really understand how deep it is in New Orleans. God, per capita, it's pretty insane how many nonprofits we have.
But we need it all, right?
And that's the thing too, is that it says something really unique about the sort of helping culture in the city.
It's a city with a huge heart, right? Yeah. I mean, I think I read a study 2 years ago. I think we're one of the most giving communities in the country. Maybe not the richest, but the amount of money that's given per capita is insane compared to other states. And so I think maybe it goes back there. It's a big Catholic community, right? Maybe it goes back to everybody feeling that we're required and asked to give back to mankind and to treat people the right way.
That would make sense to me.
So I think maybe that's where the base. I never thought of it before, but I think maybe that's where it comes from, right? We're a big Catholic community, and a lot of faith in the city, and not just religious faith, but faith in general.
So on the other side, how do you see the balance between the relationships with business? Because one thing that having a lot of familiarity with the nonprofit ecosystem, there's oftentimes like a cleave between the two, where there seems like there are major priority differences. Folks don't really understand each other. Sometimes the fear on the side of nonprofits is that you get sort of mission drift, or you get strange accountabilities from a large funder. On the other side, there's also the fear, in addition to that, of becoming sort of the pride piece of a major funder, or you sort of tokenize your programming. Yeah. But in truth, businesses, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, have really, really recognized the necessity of their accountability to their ecosystems, their environments, the communities in which they live.
Yeah, our job's really easy, right? I mean, when I go talk to a funder, let's just use a car dealership. It's a pretty easy conversation to go talk to a guy who owns a car dealership. You go in and say, hey, I'm working with kids 17 to 24. If I can do my job and if you can help me do my job, I'm going to produce 80 people a year who need an automobile. We're willing to put your logo up on our website. We're willing to hang your logo inside the restaurant. Mm-hmm. It's an easy sale. But other nonprofits have it much tougher. So I'm thankful that our pitch is pretty easy, because if we do our job, we're producing people into our city and into our economy who can really help the economy along. They don't become a strain on the economy anymore. And so that's my pitch, and that's the easiest thing for me. And the same thing with the restaurateurs, right? Being able to help these kids and for them to have families that can now go out and eat, and it might not be at their restaurant, but they're out in the community and they're spending. And I think that's where it comes from. I think businesses are starting to realize that they need to help. We're only as strong as the bottom person, right? I mean, we had a conversation before. You're athletic. I played athletics my whole life. Any team is only as strong as the weakest person on the team. And I think that's true of communities too. And I think everybody's finally getting that. We can't be a strong community unless everybody in the community is strong.
Yes.
And it's going to take us some time to get there, right? We had this conversation the other day. It's just years. We have to start out with a kid going into kindergarten and just use that generation and make sure everybody in that generation gets through school.
It has to be done as a community.
Absolutely. I look at some of our kids that have quit school in 6th and 7th grade, and I'm like, where are their parents? Where's social services? When I was a kid, if you weren't in school, there was somebody knocking on the door.
Yeah, who do you blame nowadays? What's happened? Is there even anybody to blame?
I think it's all of us, right? This is complicated because in my position, I got to be real careful about how I say this. I think our system breeds people who don't want to fight to get to the top. I think we have had students, I know we have had students that have graduated from our program that are perfectly capable of going out and working, that are perfectly capable of being really, really good inside the restaurant business. And their own parents will drag them down because it's a paycheck. That's the reality of it, right? We have so many people that are on the government coffers that don't need to be, and we reward that. We reward that every time we have a young girl come into our program. To be 18 years old and have 3 kids is insane to me. And you just go, you have open and honest conversations. Again, why? Because when I needed help, when I walked in the door, nobody wanted to help. But as soon as I had a kid, doors started opening up everywhere. And that's what our system is right now. And that's wrong. And it's backwards. I think, like you said earlier, there are kids that come into my program that will never be able to work. They're just not capable of it because of who knows what.
Any number of difficulties.
ADD,
trauma,
mental challenges.
Trauma.
Can you only imagine what some of these kids have seen? It's insane. But anyway, and so it's okay for us as a country to take care of those people. When they need help, I think it's our obligation to take care of them. But I don't think it's our obligation to allow an 18-year-old girl to have 3 kids and never be able to finish her education and never be able to work. And then she's on taxpayers' dollar from that point forward. That's what's wrong with the system. We got to find a way so that that young lady doesn't feel the need to go out and get pregnant just to get some help.
It really is a community failure.
It is.
It's not like there's one single point of responsibility. It's this kind of, what was the book, Bowling Alone?
I never read that one.
It's sort of the classic conversation in how Americans, through this particular analogy of bowling clubs and community bowling groups, it used to be the thing where you'd get together and you'd go to the alley and you would play with your community and your neighbors and you would have conversations. And now when people go bowling, they go bowling alone.
Yeah.
Or they go in small groups. And there's this sort of qualitative difference through whatever it might be, through the technology that we're exposed to nowadays, through the way that our culture has shifted and moved, through the way that we communicate with each other. where it's so quiet. All of a sudden, they say, it's not my responsibility anymore. It does seem almost as if we've just forgotten.
You talk about technology. One of the biggest battles that we have on a daily basis is I said earlier, we sit down every afternoon to have family meal together. And it's a battle, man, to get them to take the earbuds out and to get off the phones and just sit and talk for a little bit.
That was my mom's rule.
Right?
I could do whatever I wanted after school, but dinner was at 5:30.
That's gone now, man.
It kind of is, right? Everybody grabs what
you make me feel guilty. You
and
at 5:30. My poor kids are waiting for me to get home. I'm getting home at 7:30 at night.
No, we had like the grandparent special. We always did the early birds. So
it's a lot healthier lifestyle, that's for sure.
Yeah. Plus, we would go to you go to bed at like 9.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen anymore.
No. It was hard to stay up late on a flip phone. There was nothing interesting to look at.
Got a lot of this going on, man, and very little communications, you know?
Yeah, I've had to introduce like tech hygiene practices into my life.
It's true.
As far as, I was talking to another buddy who runs an organization called Project Peaceful Warriors. Chelsea Hilton does yoga and mindfulness, trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness for young folks in school. So she's
about to try to bring
teachers.
that into the Cafe Hope program.
That'd be an awesome connection to make. But we have the conversation all the time about how it's these little things. It's like having the app on the phone that only lets me go an hour a day on certain apps, keeping the cell phone out of the bedroom.
Yeah.
Just little things, blocking the blue light on your computer screen after a certain hour, because otherwise it's going to keep you awake. It keeps you wired.
That's crazy, huh?
It's all these little things.
But the yoga stuff, man, they're having great success in Chicago, teaching yoga inside the classroom.
No
Starting
kidding.
At 5th and 6th grade, bringing down suspension rates and everything.
Is
Violence way down in the Chicago school system.
And it's pure mindfulness.
Absolutely.
It must be fascinating for you to see all of these new nonprofits like yoga or like the younger ones, like you get Youth Run NOLA is doing distance running and leadership.
We've at a race on the West Bank a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
And these are such cool, innovative programs.
Yeah.
Do you, as somebody who comes from a different life story, what kind of thoughts or what kind of advice do you give to folks who are starting nonprofits or who are beginning their journey in giving back?
I don't know. I think anybody involved in a nonprofit world's got to be a little crazy. It says a lot about me. I just think the advice that I give is I found myself becoming very jaded when I started, and by that I mean and this isn't an indictment on my friends or the people that I associated with, but there were a few that I think you find out a lot about people and the people that you're around when you get involved with a nonprofit and you start asking a little bit. And some of them just aren't quite the people that you thought they would be. Does that make sense? There are a lot of people that look at you kind of crazy and go, why? What are you doing? Like, why do you immerse yourself in that world? Why are you helping those people? It's because I am those people, right? And so you become jaded. Your feelings get hurt when people say no. You're disappointed in the way some people react, especially family and friends, to what you do. I don't know. You have to have a lot of inner peace, and you have to have thick skin. And I think those are the requirements, especially from a position that I hold. When I'm the one out really trying to get the money, you really have to be thick-skinned, and you just have to accept people for who they are, and just know that some people want to help, and some people want to build wealth, and some people are fortunate enough to be able to do both. But you can't let it get to you. The other thing I would say is what we spoke about a little bit earlier, that burnout's really real, and you got to be able to take care of yourself. There's got to be a lot of self-care. You don't want to walk away, especially when things are hot and heavy. Mm-hmm. But there are times, and you know, right, after you've in it for a little bit, you know when you have to get away. You know when you're about to bust. And so that's the things that I would say to people. Just make sure you're ready to take care of yourself, self-care. I think being physically active is really important. Being able to just run or walk or get on a bike and be able to clear your mind and get rid of some of the stress and some of the frustration.
That's like, you could write the primer on it.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I should write, huh?
Are there communities like that? Are there communities of nonprofit leadership that foster that kind of sustainability and recognize the problems that you're bringing up?
I think it's becoming something that people talk about inside the nonprofit world a lot more. You know, I think when I first got into it back in 2010, I didn't know what burnout was. You know, nobody really talked about it. But again, I go back to Gordon Wadge. He was one that pulled me on the side and said, "Listen, you're showing some signs." And I'm like, "Signs of what?"
Oh, wow.
You know,
so he saw something in you.
Yeah, he goes, you gotta learn to like chill out a little bit. You got to relax and learn to let some of this stuff go. I know you take it personal, and that's who you are as a person, right? I don't know if I'm capable of doing anything and not taking it to heart. I think that's what I've learned about myself too. Whether it was you know, coaching kids. I've coached both my boys in baseball and basketball and football. I love doing that. I love being around kids. And I guess that's something that spills over too, right? I think when they finished with their athletic careers, maybe that's something that I was looking for, just to be able to be around young people again and help young people. I feel like looking back, it's probably something that was in me and I just didn't even know it. It's something that I was doing and didn't know it. There were plenty of times practice ended and I stuck around because parents used the baseball team as a babysitting service. So we stayed at the park for 2.5 hours after practice until their parents came and picked them up. And that bothered a lot of the guys out there, but it never bothered me because I was with them, you know. So I guess all of those things are in, and sometimes we don't look hard enough. We don't self-reflect enough to understand that's who we really are.
It's funny to hear you say that, because the way that you talk about the way that you grew up and having that environment where it was just the open doors and it was just always accessible, always family. I think it's so interesting to hear how the arc of your life and career has brought you to a point where you found yourself doing all the things that you were receiving as a kid.
I'm my dad.
That you didn't think about it.
And listen, I think some of those things, my dad grew up, my dad was born in Cuba. So he came to the United States when he was 7, but it's only him and his dad that left Cuba. His mother stayed behind because a wealthy family in Cuba, they owned a shoe factory and they owned a typewriter factory of all things.
That's interesting.
But she refused to leave her family. But she wanted my grandfather and my dad to be out before the Castro regime took over.
Was this during that little break when folks were fleeing?
Yeah, right before Castro. So right before the Civil War. And so my dad, when my grandfather came, he was a longshoreman for Likes Brothers. And so he married relatively quickly, married an American woman who didn't speak any Spanish. And
You're kidding me.
No. And so, you know, he went off to work and my dad's just left with these people that he couldn't even communicate with. And so I think my dad grew up without that father image. And I think he was smart enough to realize what his life was and didn't want his kids to grow up that way. And so I think that's why it was always family, and I think that's why he always wanted to be around, because his dad couldn't be around because he was out making a living.
Yeah, he was having to resettle himself in a new place.
My grandfather worked 10 months out of the year. He was on a ship 10 months out of the year, you know, and so as a kid, if I got to see my grandfather once a year, it was a lot.
Wow.
And so I think, I think my dad saw that growing up and never wanted us to feel that. So I think it's all cyclical, right? It all starts somewhere. I don't know.
It's like these Steinbeck novels. Like you read East of Eden, and it takes you through, 4 generations, starting.
It's true.
In the rural countryside on the East Coast, and it's always this little stuff along the arc of your lineage and your history and your family that it's just bits and pieces that kind of slowly adjust or react through generations.
Yeah, but then it gets back to our kids at Cafe Hope, right? They don't have that. I mean, a lot of these kids don't have a dad. A lot of these kids don't have a mom. They're growing up with grandparents, and so they lose that. Where does it come from? Where do you find out who you are and why you are what you are? They have no idea, and so that's again, it gets back to the why. Right? It gets back to, this is why I do it, because I know they don't know. And so you try to give them something that they can grab a hold of so that they can see, so that when they have kids, we start changing generations. If they never see what it's like to be a family, if they never see what it's like to be cared for, then it'll never change.
So you're really playing you're playing the generational game. You're not playing the short term, I need to get through the next 6 weeks. You're, you know what I've heard it said? I've heard it said that some folks on their goal setting, they'll do 3-year goals, 5-year goals, 10-year goals. And some folks started introducing 100-year goals into their goal setting sheets. Is that the timeline that you're pushing out? You're trying to think 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road?
Yeah, listen, if I'm really being honest, the only goal that I have is that we don't need programs like Cafe Hope anymore. That's when it's a great community, right? When we don't need programs to pick up kids who have been left behind, who don't have families. That's the goal, and I don't know how long. Maybe I'm afraid to set a 10-year goal because I don't know if it can be achieved in 10 years. I don't know if it can be achieved in 100 years. I just know that we got to do something. There's got to be, the first step has to be taken. Somebody has to fight for it so it can start. And I'm no saint and I'm no angel. I'm embarrassed sitting here. I'm listening to myself speak to you, and I'm just a normal guy, man. I'm just a normal guy who's blessed that, you know, God gave me a great life. He gave me great parents, and this is just a way to give back a little bit. I'm nothing special. I'm just a guy that wants to help a little bit. That's all.
That's a lot of modesty, man.
Well, I'm not trying to be modest, but
it's true. You have so much heart, and you bring so much of it to your work, and it really shines through. It's really clear that you.
Yeah, but it's not just me. It's, you know, when I have the opportunity to introduce my staff to people, I think I have the greatest staff in the city of New Orleans. They're certainly not at Cafe Hope because I pay them so much money. That's not it. Each and every person inside those walls feels a call into these kids, and each and every one of them brings something different, and they're special in a really unique way. I mean, a chef. Can you imagine getting a new staff every 6 weeks? Every 6 weeks, you got a new group of kids rolling through the kitchen. I don't know, I think I'd jump off a bridge. You know, it's organized chaos the first week that those kids come into a kitchen. And inevitably, that's the busiest days of the week. So that's when everybody decides they want to come eat at Cafe Hope, is the first week that we got a new class of kids in the kitchen. But you have to be a special human being to orchestrate that in the kitchen. And Garen is that, man. He's just so laid back and so at peace with himself and with that kitchen. It just seems to work out all the time.
That's what it takes.
And those stories are, you know, we're a really small staff, 8 full-time, 2 part-time, you know, putting out the work, and it's grown a little bit because of the help of some really incredible foundations. You know, again, Emerald Lagasse. I don't know if many people realize, or maybe a lot of people do, the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation pumps so much money into this system for nonprofits. I mean,
really,
those people are phenomenal. What they do inside this community. I know all 3 of our programs, Reconcile, Liberty's Kitchen, and Cafe Hope, are funded by them. Youth Empowerment Project is funded by them. And it's not, they go so deep, right? I'm going to Washington, D.C. in February on their ticket to go talk to our Congress about funding programs that can help these kids. And Cafe Hope couldn't afford to send me to do something like that, but because of the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, we all get to go as a community. Get to go knock on some doors up in Washington. So
and it really does take a community.
Yeah, again, Cafe Hope doesn't survive without the foundations. Cafe Hope doesn't survive without the people who come eat. Our restaurant produces about 60% of our income to keep the doors open.
Which is great, the fact you're a revenue-generating nonprofit.
Yeah, it's, again, that's what causes a tightrope, though, right? You have to be careful. I'd like to be a little less dependent on the restaurant so that there's not as much pressure on the chefs and the front of the house managers,
sure,
and on me. The more money I can fundraise, the less pressure on the restaurant. So, and I think that's when we're at our best. When we start getting above that 60% mark, I think it starts putting a lot of pressure on everybody to sell more food and do more events, and I think we become less effective as a program. So we got to be really careful about where that funding comes from and where those revenue streams are.
You're a tightrope walker, man. That's how we're gonna subtitle the episode.
The tightrope walker?
Lewis, the professional tightrope walker.
Yeah, I don't want to fall, man.
You seem like you're doing beautifully, and you lead with a clear sense of self, and you come at it with the entirety of yourself, which I think is so important, especially in the ecosystem. You know,
I think I'm scared to death to fail. There just aren't many programs especially on the West Bank and Jefferson Parish, for these kids 17 to 24. And if not us, then who? And so that's part of leadership, right? That's something that you have to bear the responsibility of understanding. You have to do everything right. You have to spend we have a responsibility to the people who donate, who come eat inside our restaurant, that we take care of the dollars that they give us. And that's a huge responsibility, because again, without us, I don't know where these kids would go. And I couldn't live with that. That's not a result that can happen.
You're driven.
Crazy.
We run a little bit of both. We're at 50 minutes. Does it feel like 50 minutes?
No, this has flown by.
What do you want to take us out on? What's the final thought, the final topic?
I just want to say to people, like, this problem isn't a white or a black or an Asian or a Hispanic problem. There are white kids who come from good families that are opportunity youth. And I think what I'd just say to people is, just don't judge. Like, we don't know what these kids have been through. I mean, can you imagine being 8 years old and seeing a murder? What kind of impact that has on you mentally? And so just don't judge. Just be a part of the solution. Don't be a part of the people who just sit around and complain all the time. It annoys me to hear people. I don't know if I've heard anybody curse on your program, but it annoys me to hear people just bitch all the time. And I've found that I can't stand to be around those people anymore. I got to get up and leave.
It's got to be those who are putting in the effort.
Yeah, you can't complain unless you. I mean, try to be a part of the solution before you start complaining about everybody else who's trying to be a part of the solution. That drives me insane.
That's it.
I don't know. And just to remember that, again, I think God just wants us to be good stewards of his people. And we can do that in many different ways. It's donating or sharing of your time or jumping in and working in a nonprofit. All of those things go toward taking care of humanity.
That's a beautiful place to bring it.
Be at peace.
Thank you so much for joining us, Louis. It's really such a pleasure to have you.
This was an honor.